My name is Ross, and in this video, I'd love to show you some of the tips and techniques that I use when I'm playing back and recording audio for corporate events. In part 1, we'll look at cue lists versus cue carts, playback sources into the mixer, and audio interfaces and routing. In part 2, we'll explore MIDI control, minimum go time, cue templates, and other settings to build our workspace template. In part 3, we'll record voiceovers with Twisted Wave, then route and process them in QLab. In part 4, we'll cover auditioning and choosing play-ons, incorporating voiceovers into the cue list, and best practices on executing cues. In part 5, we'll look at the QLab cookbook, QLab Google group, and I'll finish with some thoughts on paid licenses. For this demonstration, we have a simple setup that could be at a small front of house. It's a Yamaha DM3 mixer, a Mac Mini running QLab with an external monitor and a keyboard and mouse. I love having a keyboard and mouse right in front of the mixer because it's very ergonomic while working on the show to be able to adjust things on the computer without leaning over a laptop. But you can use any Mac to run QLab, and all recent Macs run QLab really well. This mixer, while being small and cute, is also a great example because it has Dante built in, so we can route audio that way. It has a USB audio interface built in, also a way we can route audio, and a way we can get MIDI control from the mixer to the computer. One of the key concepts to understand about QLab is that it can play cues either in a list or a cart. A list works a lot like a lighting console where you have a stack of cues, and each time you execute a cue, the playhead moves down to the next cue, waiting or standing by until you go that cue. Going a cue plays the cue and moves your playhead down again one, so you're ready for the next one. Cue lists are great because you can put things in order that you know they're going to go in, and then each time you need to play the next cue, all you need to do is press go. It takes the guesswork out of finding the cue and then playing it because you already know the next cue that's meant to be played in order is ready to go. It's on deck, it's standing by. Now, just because cue lists have an order and that you step through them in order doesn't mean that you can't choose to go out of order. So, for example, you could use your mouse to click on a cue that's out of order, and the next time you press go, it's going to play that cue. Please take your seats. You can also use the up and down keys on the keyboard to choose what cue you want to play next, or you can use user-defined keys, which we'll talk more about later. A key thing to remember about cue lists is that every time you press go, you are telling QLab to do the next thing. And if you're using your spacebar for go, that can be a little bit confusing because we're so used to spacebar being play, pause in almost every other application. You're used to pressing spacebar to play, and suddenly you want to stop and you press spacebar again. In QLab, if you press spacebar again, it's going to play the next thing and the next thing, and you can have cacophony very quickly. So instead of even using the spacebar, it might be better to use a user-defined key that you know is the go button, and every time you hit that go button, it does something, and if you want to stop things, you press your stop button. Same thing with your MIDI controller. The go button always plays something, and the panic button always stops things. As an alternative to cue lists, you also have cue carts built into QLab, and carts are more of a random access way to organize and play back cues. So we can make a new cart just by choosing the new cart button. And if you select the cart in the sidebar, you can choose its grid size to be any number of rows and columns that make sense for the number of cues that you might need to play. So we'll do a 3x3 grid of 9 cues. You can drag and drop cues into here, or you can select cues from another cue list, switch to your cart, choose a starting place, and paste them in. Now, by default in edit mode, we're not in show mode, we're in edit mode. To play these, you need to click the little play button in the upper right-hand corner of each cue tile. Or we can switch to show mode, and then the entire cell turns into a clickable button to play that cue. Now, there's a way to stay in edit mode and still get this functionality. If we stick in edit mode, and in our list of cues, we right-click on the cue cart, we can choose Open in New Window. That will open it in a show mode style window while the rest of the workspace is still in edit mode. And this can be resized and placed wherever is convenient on your computer, including on another monitor. And then we could, for example, be looking at a different playlist and still trigger these in whatever order we want. Please take your seats. The program will begin in 5 minutes. I really like this combination of lists and carts because you can still use your remote controller to choose where you are in a queue list and fire those queues in order, while at the same time have a random access cart ready to go for things that can't be predicted what order they'll go in, which would often be things like sound effects during a game show, or voiceovers that are going to depend on the action that happens on stage, or a bunch of rapid fire play-ons that need to be picked on the fly during an awards show. So you can have the best of both worlds with both carts and lists. There is not a way to convert a cart to a list or vice versa, but what you can always do is select all of the queues in either a cart or a list and copy and paste them to the other format. One thing I would recommend with queue carts is to always set up the if running a second trigger panics, and this will fade out that queue over the panic duration, which is usually 1 second. And I find that that's a pretty expected behavior for when you click on a button and then you want to stop that queue, you just click on it again. So let's try that. Please take your seats. Start it by clicking on it, click on it again to stop it. And then depending on how you're using a cart, you might find that you also want to click the fade and stop cart over time so that as you choose a different queue, it fades out the previous queues that are already playing in that cart. Please take your seats. Please take your seats. Please take your seats. Please welcome Vice President of Sales. You could hear the previous queue fading out gracefully, but we can always change that time to maybe a 0.1 second fade out and have a little bit less overlap. Please take your seats. Please take your seats. Please take your seats. Please welcome Vice President of Pretty much all events are going to need some kind of walk-in and walk-out music that can also be played during breaks. And that would often be supplied by the client in the form of a Spotify playlist or Apple Music playlist. In general, it's nice to keep that as a separate source in your mixer so that, number one, you have quick control over bringing walk-in and walk-out music up or down. Two, so you can route it differently. For example, you might not want to send your walk-in music to a stream, especially if there's music rights considerations. And three, you might want to layer a voiceover on top of that, and in which case you want separate control over the volume and the routing of the voiceover compared to the walk-in music. So we've got our walk-in music that's going to come in as a stereo channel, and that can come from a different computer, from your QLab machine, or the same computer. Some people like to use an iPad for their walk-in music. In this case, I like to use the same computer that I'm running all of my QLab cues on to run walk-in music. Then, in addition to that, you'll want at least one stereo input to play cues or sounds during the show that need to be played back. Those could be pre-recorded voiceovers. That could be play-ons and play-offs to get people on and off stage. Could be sound effects for a game show. It could be music performance tracks that someone's going to sing along to or dance along to. All those things could come in on a stereo channel called Cues or QLab. And taking it a step further, we could separate the voiceovers out into a separate QLab playback channel. And that gives you even more control over where you send the voiceovers versus where you send music playback. So with those types of content in mind, let's talk about how we can get audio from our QLab computer to a mixer. There's a number of different ways, and the simplest would be to use the headphone jack of the mixer and could be a mini jack to XLR cable or a stereo DI, and that goes into the mixer's analog inputs. Additionally, this is one of the least expensive, smallest audio interfaces that is made right now, which is an Apple USB-C to 1/8 inch. It's actually a digital to analog converter. There's a tiny DAC in the USB-C part of the adapter. And if you plug that into your Mac, it'll show up as another stereo output. So that's an option. Of course, Focusrite or similar USB interface is always an option as a higher quality digital to analog converter, which could have just a stereo output or multiple outputs. And then from there, there's some built-in options on digital mixers that give us even higher channel counts and easier patching. So some mixers have Dante I/O. Pretty much all Yamaha mixers that are used in a corporate setting will have this, so it's a great choice for that. And then a lot of mixers also have built-in USB interfaces, like a DM3 or a DM7. And in this example, we're using a DM3, which has both Dante on board and a USB interface on board. So assuming in this example that we're going to play our walk-in music from the same computer that we play our QLab cues from, let's look at using the simplest audio output option, which is the headphone output, as well as a USB-C to 1/8 inch adapter. Under sound settings, we can just choose external headphones, and that will route all computer audio by default out of this output. And then if we play something out of Apple Music, that's where it's going to come out of. Next, if we want to use the USB-C to 1/8 inch interface for our QLab, that's also easy. In QLab, we'll go to our workspace preferences. Under audio, patch 1, we just choose USB-C to 3.5 millimeter headphone jack adapter. And now all audio played out of QLab will come out of that into another stereo input on the mixing console. And we've now got our music input for walk in and walk out, and we've got our QLab input for everything else. But more commonly, I would use Dante Virtual Sound Card to get multiple channels of audio in and out. So let's look at how we might set that up. In this case, I'll plan on a stereo channel for walk-in music that's coming from this computer via Dante, a stereo channel for QLab playback of music. That could be play-ons, stingers, music beds for awards, performance tracks, etc. And then a mono channel for VOs that are going to be played out of QLab. So that's 5 channels coming out. And then going into the computer, I've patched a dubbing bus, which is just a stereo pre-fade bus from the console to the computer so that we can record voiceovers or anything else that needs to be recorded into the computer for playback later. Now, in QLab, once we need to play back something out of Spotify and QLab at the same time and send them to different destinations, there's a couple different routing techniques that we can use, but the one I prefer to is to let Spotify come out of the first 2 channels of the audio interface, because that's what it's going to default to. And that way we don't need to do any hacks or workarounds in the Mac operating system. We'll just let it play Apple Music, Spotify, what have you, out of its default outputs. In QLab, though, we're going to go to our workspace settings in audio. We'll set the output to Dante Virtual Sound Card. And if we don't change anything now, a default cue in QLab is going to come out of outputs 1 and 2, which is the same as our walk-in music, and that's not what we want. We want them to come out of our next set of outputs 3 and 4. So if you have the QLab Pro audio license, you can edit an audio patch here. That brings up this window where you can name outputs. These are cue outputs, not device outputs. You can then route them to your device outputs, and then from there, the device outputs can get effects inserted on them. In our case, we don't need to do any device EQ, but we do want to change the default routing. So to unassign these cross points, I can hold down Option on the keyboard and just click, and that removes that cross point. If I want to add it, I just hold down Option and click again. So what we're going to do here is flip-flop outputs 1 and 2 with outputs 3 and 4 in QLab on a global routing basis. So this is changing the output routing from QLab. Any cue we send to Q outputs 1 and 2 will come out of 3 and 4, and any cue that we send out of Q outputs 3 and 4 will come out of 1 and 2. Once we set this up once, we never have to think about it again with our individual cues. So we assign Q outputs 1 and 2 to device outputs 3 and 4, and Q outputs 3 and 4 to device outputs 1 and 2. That's done. And while we're in here, I might name Q output 5 VOG. So now let's test that we have our routing set up correctly and that things are coming in as we expect. First, let's go ahead and change our system setting for our sound output to Dante Virtual Sound Card. That'll make sure that Apple Music or Spotify comes out of the first 2 channels. And we've got our music playing, and I can see already that it's coming in to the tunes or walk-in music input. And it sounds good. Now let's check QLab. And we're going to listen to it and see if it comes into our cues channel. Yep, it does. And then last but not least, let's look at sending it to our VO channel, which is number 5. If I unassign it from outputs 1 and 2, and I assign it to output number 5, I can see it's coming into my QVO input. So now I know that my output routing from the computer to the console via Dante Virtual Sound Card is all set up. And if you wanted to do this with the USB interface on your console, like the DM3s, Yamaha DM3, and similarly in QLab, we could change patch 1 from Dante Virtual Sound Card to Yamaha DM3. This is where you can choose how you want an external MIDI device to control QLab. There's a few different ones that we can look at. The first one is a dedicated controller like this. This is the Team Sound GoBox Mini. It's got 4 buttons in the middle, and then a red button, which would usually be used for stop, and a green button for go. What's cool about this is that it has 2 USB outputs that connect to 2 different computers, and that way you can control a primary and a backup QLab machine at the same time. And as you step through your show, they stay in sync. Not just every time you press go that they both start at the same time, but if you assign these buttons for previous and next cue, you can scroll up and down your cue list without having the 2 machines get out of sync. This is a pretty plug-and-play box in that it sends out pre-coded MIDI notes when you press each button. You can't customize them. There's no drivers to install. You just plug it into 1 or 2 computers, and then we can tell QLab to listen for these commands. So we need to check the box for use musical MIDI voice messages. And then we can use the capture function and simply press what button we want to be the go button, which is green. And it figures out that that's note on with a byte 1 value of 1 and a byte 2 value of 127. And let's put a few others in. Let's do playhead previous. We'll do up for that. Playhead next, down, and panic all our red stop button. Now let's see if it works. We'll go down the cue list. Yep, scrolling down works, scrolling up works. Pressing please take your seats. Works. The program will begin in 10 minutes. I also highly recommend using the user-defined keys on Yamaha mixing consoles to control QLab. What's great is they're built into the console, so you don't have to travel with another controller. Ergonomically, they're in the perfect spot while you're mixing the show to be able to trigger QLab and have your hands on the faders at the same time. And the buttons typically feel really good on the CL and QL series, the Rivage, the DM7. They all have high-quality buttons that are industrial buttons meant to last for many button pushes. And on the newer consoles, the MIDI can be sent over USB, so you don't even need a USB interface. On CL, QL, Rivage, DM7 series mixers, you can simply choose what MIDI note you want a user-defined key to output when you press it. On the DM3, there's no option to send MIDI when you press a user-defined key, but there is a workaround, which is DAW remote keys enable. Now, the great thing about controlling QLab via a MIDI controller, whether that's your console's user-defined keys or an external USB MIDI button box, is that those signals will be received by QLab whether or not it's the frontmost application on your Mac. So let's say that we were looking at Dante Controller troubleshooting something. We can see QLab in the background, but if I hit the space bar, of course, it's not going to control QLab, it's going to control Dante Controller. However, our user-defined keys will still work because they're sending that MIDI message in the background to the computer, and we can play a cue at a moment's notice. Please take your seats. The program will begin in 10 minutes. So this means that when you're standing by for a cue, you know what cue is supposed to be next. You can be rest assured that whenever the show caller calls for it, or you know that it's the right time to play that cue, regardless of what you're doing on the computer, you can immediately hit the go button. Please take your seats. The program will be... and know that it's going to play. Now, when we take a USB output from a DM3 or DM7 straight to a computer as our method of MIDI control, that leaves out a way to control a backup computer at the same time. And so for that, I recommend using an actual 5-pin DIN MIDI output instead of a USB output. Most of these mixers, the QL, the CL, Rivage, the DM7 with the right option card, all have a physical MIDI output. And this box is a perfect solution for controlling your main and backup computers via MIDI. There's 2 MIDI inputs and outputs and 2 USB ports to connect to 2 different computers. So it's as simple as taking the MIDI output from your console into the MIDI 1 input, and then connecting your primary computer to one of the USB ports and your backup computer to the other USB port. And then anytime you use your user-defined keys on the mixer to control QLab, both computers will be controlled simultaneously. And this is made by iConnectivity. They don't make this exact model anymore, but you can still find them around used. Or you can get one of their larger USB MIDI interfaces that does the same thing. So now let's look at some of the other settings in QLab, as well as things we can do to prepare a blank QLab file to be ready to use in a corporate event. Then we can save that as a template, and every time we make a new QLab file, it'll be ready to go. We can go to the General Settings and unselect Auto Number New Queues. This will just make every new queue not have a queue number, and then you can go in after the fact and type in whatever queue number you want that corresponds to the show flow or some other document. While we're here, I would recommend changing the minimum time required between each go to 1 second or more. This means that if you accidentally double tap your go button, whether that's the space bar or another trigger, the second tap won't be counted. It will be ignored by QLab if it's within a second. And in most corporate events, we never want to play 2 sound effects back to back within 1 second. It's always going to be a mistake, not intentional. In theater, you might need to play a bunch of sound effects quickly back to back. But if we're playing a voiceover and then a play-on or 2 different play-ons, they're never going to be less than a second apart. So this will protect you from accidental second button presses. Under templates, we can also customize the default settings when you make a new cue in a QLab session. So for example, when you make a new audio cue, I like to change the default main level to -6. So that means anytime you drag and drop audio files into QLab or otherwise add content to your show, the default level for that cue will be -6. And the reason for that is a lot of the music that we play at corporate events is mastered pop music, which is extremely loud, extremely compressed. And I don't want that coming in full scale, hitting brick wall 0 on the console. Let's at least reduce everything by 6 dB, and then we can fine tune from there. Otherwise, one other thing to consider changing in your default audio cue template is if you expect that you'll never need to play 2 cues simultaneously, then you can check this box, which means when you start a second cue in QLab, the first cue will automatically stop. This avoids ever accidentally playing 2 things at once. However, if you expect you might have to play a voiceover and a play-on at the same time, then I would not check this as your default. I'm going to delete the content we have in our session right now because we're going to get ready to make this our template that starts every new session. I'm going to show the sidebar, which has 2 modes, cue lists and active queues. Active queues shows you what's running and is a great place to be while you're in the middle of running a show. But cue lists is a great way to organize your content and organize different cue lists for each session in your show. So, for example, we can make a cue list called play-ons. And as you get content from a client, or you need to pull your own play-ons or download them from a music store, you can put them all into this cue list and have a library for that show of the possible play-ons you might use. Similarly, I like a cue list that's called VOs. And as you record VOs, they all go in this folder. And that way, if you later need to go find one, you can look back and just have a simple list of all of your VOs. Also, it gives you an easy place to quickly modify them all together once you import them. And I also like to have a scripts cue list. Scripts are super powerful and can be used to make QLab do a number of different things. And there's just a few simple scripts that I like to use at corporate events to make things move a little quicker when I'm trying to get a show up and running. The first 3 scripts are simply keyboard shortcuts that quickly change the routing of a cue from either the cues output to the tunes output or the VOG output. And the next 2 are a simple volume up and volume down by 3 dB. These are all just ways to create keyboard shortcuts for functions that don't already have keyboard shortcuts in QLab. Next, I have a set of Apple scripts that control either Apple Music, which used to be called iTunes, or Spotify. And depending on which one I'm using on a show, I can enable or disable these. And then I can either control them via user-defined keys on the mixer to start and stop playback of Spotify, or I can drop them into the cue list and have the Spotify or music start and stop cues be part of my cue list, even though they're controlling an application that's different from QLab. So let's demonstrate how these scripts work. My keyboard shortcut for the script that we just looked at is Shift-V. You can see that changed the crosspoint routing. It took the first two crosspoints away and set this to -6 to the VOG bus. That way when I play this, we see it coming in on our QLab in 10 minutes VOG channel. If I want to change it back to our default QLab outputs, I can press the A button and it routes it back to those. And if I want it to come out of outputs 3 and 4, I press the B button and now it's coming out of those. These are all things you could do manually by holding down Option and clicking, or you could also click and type 6 and 6, which routes the left side of the file to this VOG output at -6 and the right side of this file to VOG bus at -6. But I have these scripts set up to quickly just use the keyboard to move them around. Another script I showed you was increase and decrease the main volume level. Instead of using the mouse to adjust the main volume level, I can use these keys here, comma and period, or the left and right brackets to go down 3 dB, up 3 dB. And you can press it a few times in a row to quickly adjust the volume. And I find that a 3 dB increment is the perfect increment to quickly get a cue where it needs to be in terms of its level roughly, and then you can always fine tune later. And last but not least, let's look at the iTunes or music or Spotify control. If we drop this into our main cue list and we show Apple Music, you can see it's currently playing. And if I play this cue, it just paused. Let's listen to it. I'll play it again. We've got music playing. Press it again, it paused music. So now we've got our template pretty much ready to save. We've got scripts already in here that are our special shortcuts or tools that we might use on every show. And we have some blank cue lists that can be loaded with the content for that show and keep things organized right away. We also set all of our settings in the Workspace Settings tabs. And so this is ready to go. Let's save as a template, and let's name it our great template. Save. And if we go back to New from Template, we can actually right-click on the template we just made and choose Set as Default and select. Now, every time we make a new workspace, it comes in pre-populated with the cue lists as we set up. It has our scripts already in our scripts cue list. And if we look at the workspace settings, we'll see it already has our settings just as we want, including minimum go time of 1 second. We unchecked auto number new cues so that it doesn't create cue numbers for us. It's got our workspace MIDI set up for whatever our standard controller is. In this case, it's the user-defined keys on the DM3. Our audio patch is set to the one that we typically like to use, and even our routing swap between outputs 1 and 2 and 3 and 4 has been done. So there's a lot of work here that's already been taken care of by creating this template. QLab can't record audio natively. It doesn't have a recording function. But that's okay. We'll use any third-party recording app of your choice. And I really like to use Twisted Wave. Twisted Wave is a simple, relatively inexpensive app for recording, playing, and editing audio. And it's much more lightweight and fast to use than a full digital audio workstation like Pro Tools or Logic. So in my opinion, it's perfect for quickly recording voiceovers, getting them edited and lightly processed and out to QLab. In Twisted Wave, we just want to make sure that our input device is set to virtual sound card or your USB interface or your Focusrite, however you're getting your audio from the console to your computer. And on the output side, we can send it also out Dante Virtual Sound Card so that when we're working with audio, we want to listen back to our recording, we can hear it. On the console, I will take our VOG microphone at front of house and send that to the pre-fade dubbing bus that goes to the computer. I like to send it pre-fade so that I can turn the fader down in the house, record all the VOs without the audio coming through the PA system, but be able to easily bring that fader back up when the stage manager wants to make an announcement. So we've got that mic routed pre-fade into the computer, and in Twisted Wave, we can turn on check input levels. There we go. I see microphones coming in, and let's go ahead and hit the record button and record some sample VOs. Please take your seats. The program will begin in 10 minutes. Please take your seats. The program will begin in 5 minutes. Please take your seats. At this time, please silence all cell phones. The program will begin shortly. Please welcome Vice President of Sales, Shane Smith. Okay, so there's our VOs, and you can hear why I don't usually get asked to record them. I'll just delete the top and tail. And a quick way to normalize our level is to use the normalize function to -1. That brings up our loudest peak to -1 full scale. Next, I like to segment the file using markers, name each cue, and then export them. So that's as easy as pressing the M key on the keyboard, and I like to just give it a number, and we'll call that 10 minutes. And I can eyeball that this is probably where the second one starts, but if we need to, we can just take a listen. Please take your seats. The program... Okay, so that's our 5-minute warning. I'll call that O2, 5 minutes. Here's our third one. This is O3, and this is shortly cell phones. And then last but not least, I'll remove some of the silence. We've got this one, which is the opening voiceover for the show. This will be O4, Shane Smith. If you wanted to, you could do some processing at this point. You can select all and go to effects, and you could insert any kind of VSTs or AUs to EQ or compress or reduce noise, etc. I like to keep this pretty flat so that if someone needs to make a VOG announcement live from the same microphone, it sounds similar. So now we're ready to export, and I'd like to have Twisted Wave automatically export each section from marker to marker as a separate file with the marker's name, and we can do that by selecting Split by Markers. Here's all of our cues. We can go ahead and split and put it in the folder that we've pre-labeled On-Site VOG Records. Boom. We already recorded our voiceovers, so let's navigate to the VO's cue list. And I'm going to drag and drop all those VOs that we already recorded. And while they're all still selected, I'll move them from outputs 1 and 2 to the VOG output at -6, since we're summing a stereo file to a mono bus. Now, a word of warning about mono and stereo voiceover files. Let's quickly export this as a mono file. We'll call this mono VOG. And I'll drag and drop that file into our cue list. Notice that it only has 1 row at the bottom, whereas the other files have 2 rows for left channel and right channel. They number these 1 and 2, but you can consider them left and right. When this comes into QLab, by default, it assigns channel 1 to output channel 1, and since there is no channel 2, it didn't assign anything to channel 2. And when we play this, it's only going to come out of the left output of our main stereo QLab output. This can be a tricky little issue on shows, especially if, for example, your front of house location is all the way house left against the wall. And so you play this cue and you hear it coming out of the left side of the PA, and you don't even notice that it's not coming out of the right side of the PA until you look at your metering. So just know that if you're bringing a mono file into QLab and sending it out your default stereo output, you need to either add your second cross point so it comes out of output 2, or just use a mono VOG bus. Now, by the way, just because you have a VOG bus or Q output set up in QLab doesn't mean it needs to have its own dedicated hardware or virtual sound card output. You can matrix these things together in the QLab output routing and still get some benefits of having a separate bus in QLab. And you can see currently the VOG Q output, or think of it as a bus in QLab, is coming out of device output 5, in this case Dante Virtual Sound Card output 5. But if we wanted, we could unassign it from there and assign it to outputs 3 and 4, which is our cues output, the one we're using for music play-ons and performance tracks. So let's take a look and make sure that that worked. Again, this mono VOG file is assigned to bus 5, but when we play it, instead of coming out of the channel 5 in the mixer, it'll come out of the cues output. Please take your seats. The program will begin in 5 minutes. So that means this method is compatible with a super simple QLab setup, like having your headphone output for your walk-in music and your USB-C adapter for your QLab cues. It doesn't require any more than those 2 stereo outputs. But the benefits you get is you can do some processing in QLab. So if we go back to our audio patch and our cue outputs, number 5, we have the option here to add audio effects. So let's add a parametric EQ. This is the built-in Apple audio unit. And I'm going to go ahead and set this cue to loop. Under time and loops, I'll turn on infinite loop so we can play with it. And as I play it, I'll adjust my filter. Please take your seats. The program will begin in 5 minutes. Please take your seats. Okay. The program will begin. I like that EQ, and the great thing is now if I take all of my other voiceovers, they're all already going to that VOG bus, so they will all be processed with this same bus EQ in QLab. Please take your seats. The program will begin in 10 minutes. And at any point, if I decide I want to make an adjustment to that bus EQ, I can simply make it, and it applies in real time to all of those cues. Yet it still comes out of my main cues output from QLab into my mixer, and it reduces all of my mixing to a walk-in music fader and a cues fader, which includes VOs that have been processed, and it includes play-ons, etc. For now, let's go ahead and restore our separate VO channel that comes in separately to the mixer. Under patch routing, we'll move VOG back to device output 5. And let's still keep our filter on it. Why not? We'll do our VOG EQing here instead of in the console. I like to color all of my VOs the same color and all my play-ons a different color. So I've got them here. They've all been routed to the VOG bus. They're orange. I can take a look and see if they all look pretty good in terms of the start time. If I want to adjust them, I can drag the start time and end time. Or I can use keyboard shortcuts, which is to click where you want the out point and then Shift-O. And if you want to set the in point and out point at the same time, you can drag to highlight the section you want and then choose Shift-I-O. You hold down the Shift key and then press I and O back to back. Let's say the client just gave us some music tracks that they want to use as play-ons, but of course they haven't edited them yet. We haven't heard them before, so I just drag them in here to our play-ons cue list. And just looking through the waveforms, I can guess that the client is going to want these to start at a high energy point, probably the chorus of the songs, even though these are royalty-free songs, so I'm not familiar with the structure of them. But using the waveform, we can get a pretty good idea of where we might want to start. Certainly, we don't want to start right at the very beginning. Not only is it low energy, but we would want to trim that silence anyway. I'm just using the trackpad to zoom in and out. And I'm just going to go to this part, which looks like the chorus or the hook. And I'm going to use the V key to preview and the S key to stop. And the advantage of using the V key instead of the spacebar is when you hit the spacebar, QLab advances to the next cue because it's running through your cue list in order. But right now, we're not trying to play the cue list in a show. We're trying to just control the editing function of this one cue. So V. Hitting S will fade out, or hitting S twice will stop immediately. Okay, so let's listen again. So as expected, right where this downbeat is, where this loudest note is probably where we want to have our in point. So Shift-I. Okay, and let's go ahead and listen to it again. Great. Let's try another one. Okay, I can see we're probably going to want to start somewhere in here. Let's zoom in a little bit. We might want this little drum fill, but probably not. Let's just start right on the downbeat. Shift-I and play. That one's good. I'm going to skip all the way to this loudest section right here. Let's zoom in a little bit, look for the downbeat. And we're not even going to listen. We're just going to Shift-I and see how it turned out. Let's see if there's another option. This piece seems not as fun as the other ones. I'm going to move it to the bottom of the list. And that way when the client later says, let's listen to all these, we've got our best options at the front. Let's edit another one. That's fun, and I think that drum fill is kind of a nice lead-in, so let's set our in point there. Again, this is assuming we haven't gotten any direction from the client of in points or what they want to hear, so we're using our best judgment. And sometimes what I do is I make 2 edits of the same cue so that if they say, do we need to have that drum intro? Can we just start when the beat drops, so to speak? I have that option ready to go. So I'm going to copy and paste the cue. Let's zoom back in and start at the downbeat. So there's the downbeat, Shift-I. Now I've got these 2 options, and I'll often just name it drum fill intro and downbeat. So we can give them both options easily and quickly. No, you don't want the drum fill. Here's the other option. That one's good. Let's go to the next one. Okay, next one. It's kind of a better way to start, I think, with that fill here. Great. All right, there's the hook right at the beginning. I think we could make that a little bit tighter. There we go. In general, there's going to be multiple choruses in the song, and I try to start our in point at the earliest chorus so that if we need to have an exceptionally long piece of music, like for an awards bed, we don't run out of track. The only time it might make sense to choose a later chorus is if there's like a guitar solo or something that's more interesting over a later chorus that you want that excitement. But otherwise, starting earlier in the song is often better. Now, looking at the duration column here, we can see how long the edited versions of all of these are. And by the way, if we click this button, it will change from elapsed to remaining. And remaining is usually what we want to see, how much time is left on this track before it runs out. And speaking of running out, it's not a bad idea to create simple loops of all of the music cues that you're editing. If it's meant to get someone on stage and you're playing them on and the cue is at least a minute long, then you probably don't need to loop it because it rarely takes more than a minute to get someone on or off stage. But if it's an award winner or an awards bed or something like that, you may find yourself in a situation where you need a lot more music. And if you've already set up a loop, then no sweat, it'll just keep playing forever. So let's use this as an example. In QLab, you can change this play option to infinite loop. And In that case, this might sound okay. Let's listen to what happens at the end of the song. Looks like the song is going to tail out, and then it'll start at the beginning where we set our in point. That's fine. It just sounds like a song starting again from the beginning. But we can make a seamless loop, which will be probably the right option if it's an awards bed. So let's listen for a loop point. Okay, so on that guitar at the end there, that's the downbeat, and that can be our loop. Let's set our out point there, and we'll finesse this to try to get it to be a nice seamless loop. That was a little early. Let's try again with a longer out time. A little bit too long. We're right in the wheelhouse. Let's listen again. Great. There's a little whooshing sound effect at the end that kind of signals that it's about to end, that maybe we don't want, so we could back up to find an earlier downbeat that's a cleaner transition. Let's use this one instead. Shift O. And let's listen to our loop again. Great. So now our total duration is 2 minutes and 35 seconds, but it's on an infinite loop. It will play forever. If for some reason we only wanted it to play twice, we could just do this, and after it plays twice, it will stop. Once you change it to infinite loop, though, there's no indication on the actual cue list that it's a loop, so I like to just add a note at the end that says loop. Now let's look at slices, which is QLab's word for markers. Once you define some slices in QLab, you can choose the play times of the regions in between the slices. So let's copy and paste this cue. Let's say that we want to include the intro, but then once we get past the intro, we want to get into a vamp or a loop. So let's first trim the dead space out of the beginning and listen. Okay, so let's just say that we want to take this musical passage through there and loop it. So I'll click here and then press the M key, which happens to be the same keyboard shortcut as Twisted Wave for putting a marker in. And the beginning of this loop is the downbeat after the intro, right there. So we'll zoom in and put a marker here. And now I can change the play counts of the regions in between each slice. So let's change this to 2. What QLab will now do is play from the beginning. Once it hits the second slice, it will loop back to this slice, play this region again, and then continue on all seamlessly. Let's listen. You can also change this number to INF, and it will create an infinite loop within this region, so it'll never pass by the second slice. It'll just keep going back to this one. And you can even change it to 0, so it will play it 0 times. It'll skip right past it. Jumped right to here. Now, generally where this is most useful is creating an infinite loop with an intro. So we can actually change this second slice all the way to the end. And that way we get the advantage of the first time we play it, we get the nice intro. Let's say the client wants it to start with kind of a ramp up, they want it to build up. But once we get into our loop, we want it to loop at the same intensity level forever. We never want to hear that intro again. So we've got a nice short intro with a play count of 1, then it seamlessly goes into this loop, and it loops here infinite number of times, and we never hear the intro again. There's one other place that a slice count of 0 can be really useful, which is in voiceovers. Let's say this is our opening VO for the show, and it announces Shane Smith, and he's the Vice President of Sales. Please welcome Vice President of Sales, Shane Smith. And 4 seconds before the show's about to start, the client is in a panic, and they say, he's not the Vice President of Sales, he's the Senior Vice President of Manufacturing. Well, we don't have time to re-record it, and the stage manager is too flustered to do it live. So you can say, no worries, I'll just make a slice here and here, and change this to 0, and we'll just skip that part of the VO. Please welcome Shane Smith. And as long as the intonation is reasonable from your recording, no one will be the wiser that you took that section out. You didn't even have to go back into your editing software. You didn't have to split it up into 2 cues. You could just use the slice functionality to remove that section. Now let's look at building an example cue list for the show. First, we want to choose which play-ons are going to be used when, and the client might say, just use whatever you want, or they might say, well, show me what you got, I want to listen. The best way I have found to audition play-ons for the client is to be in your playlist of all the play-ons you've already edited, and you're going to use the keyboard to go up and down, and the V key to preview. And we'll turn this up in the PA, and we'll say, okay, here's the first one. And I can use the S key to gently fade it out. Notice I'm not using the spacebar, and the reason is I want to be able to modify this cue while we're listening to it, rather than having to go back and select it. So if I use the spacebar, and they say, oh, I like that cue, I need to manually go up or click on it with my mouse. But if I use the V key instead of the spacebar, that cue remains highlighted and selected, and I can immediately do a few things. One of them is I can flag it. So the F key on the keyboard is the default for flag, and that just adds a little flag at the very beginning of the cue item. I like to use flags for approved play-ons, so I start playing. Client says, yep, I love it. I hit F, and I go, let's listen to the next one. Down, V. And they just give you that look. No, I don't think I really like that. Okay, we'll go to the next one. They love it, so we'll flag it, and they say, you know what, that would be perfect for Bob Johnson. So what I just did here is the Q key highlights the name of the cue, and it lets you use your keyboard to type in. So I press the left arrow to go back to the beginning of the cue name, and I'm going to type in PO for play on, Bob Johnson. And then I'll leave the rest of the file name in there so I can easily see what the name of the song is and who the artist is. Okay, let's go through the next one. That was the second edit I made of that same song in case the client didn't like the drums. Okay, they say they like that one too, so we'll flag it. And this one, they like that one, and they say that would be perfect for Sarah Jones. Boom. I can select all the flag ones that the client likes and copy and paste them into my main cue list. If I select all and press F, it'll remove the flags because I don't need to see those in the main cue list. But if we go back to the play-ons list, I left them there so that we can always go back later and say, can I hear all the ones that that I already liked? Or let's listen to some of the ones that we didn't like and see if we can find a couple more usable ones from those. So now let's say we have some item numbers from our show flow for Bob Johnson, and that's item number 12, and Sarah Jones is item number 20. Now we've got some nice, useful information in our main cue list. We have item numbers for the things that we've already assigned. We have the name of the presenter, and I can feel confident starting to play these now. So for example, let's say someone is on stage and they're about to introduce Bob Johnson. It's not a VOG, it's not a pre-recorded VO, it's one presenter on stage introducing someone else. So the sequence would be, I would make sure my cues fader's up. Typically I'll have it down when we're not in a transition. And then I'll have my finger on my user-defined key that's set for go. And then I'll visually look and see, yep, I have the right cue Not only is it highlighted in the cue list, but I can see it's also on deck up here. That's the next cue that will play. And I'm just waiting for either the show caller to say, play on 12, go, or if we don't have a show caller or they're not calling that, I'm waiting for the magic words, please welcome my friend Bob Johnson. My finger's already on the button waiting for it, and as soon as I hear the cue, whether it's from the presenter or the show caller, all I have to do is just press this button. They're walking across the stage, they're shaking hands, and it looks like he's about ready to start, so I'm going to slowly fade out. Now, why am I using this fader to fade out the cue instead of pressing escape on QLab or the panic key on my user-defined key, or even putting in a fade cue in QLab? Well, the reason is I don't know how fast I want to fade out that music. That's a real-time judgment call based on the action that's happening on stage. And it could even lead to, if it's a song that the presenter likes, which often is the case, the presenter chose their own play on, they might even start dancing to it while I've started to fade it out, and I can just bring the fader back up. Maybe I've only faded it out 5 dB so far, and no one's really noticed that. But if I had started a panic, a sequence in QLab, or a fade cue in QLab, once that starts, there's no going back. It's going to keep fading out over the number of seconds that you've set up. And even after I've faded it out, you know, if it's nearly faded out, but then they say, no, let's hear it again, let's make some more noise, I can just bring it right back up. It's still playing. Once he starts his presentation, I can go ahead and press my panic user-defined key, and it stops it. And my next cue is loaded in the cue list. And when it's time to play that one, bring the fader back up, waiting for the cue from the show caller or the presenter on stage. Ready to go, and then I just fade out. Let's add our housekeeping VOs to our cue list, our 10-minute, 5-minute, and shortly. We'll put those up at the top. And let's look at how we might use those. So first we'll listen. Please take your seats. The program will begin in 10 minutes. So typically we'd be listening to some walk-in music. And I like to drag my QLab window just under the now playing info in music, or in Spotify, I move it at the top because Spotify is down here at the bottom. But in this case, I want to be able to see when the song is transitioning, what the name of the song is and the artist, because that can all be useful information. So if I see a song's about to end, that's always a nice place to drop in a VO. Please take your seats. The program will begin in 10 minutes. And the next song should hopefully start shortly. And the nice thing about having your separate fader or input for your walk-in and walk-out music is it makes it really easy to put your pre-show and housekeeping announcements on the top of it. You have totally separate volume control, and you can often use one hand to both bring down your walk-in music and push your VO over the top, especially if it's a noisy room full of people. So let's do the 5-minute announcement now. I'll bring this down just a second before I play this to clear some aural space for it, and then we'll go. Please take your seats. The program will begin in 5 minutes. And I'm looking at the duration countdown in my cue list to see exactly how much time is left before I need to bring the fader back up. And again, you can change between elapsed time and time remaining using this little arrow button here. And now it's time to play our shortly in cell phones. Please take your seats. At this time, please silence all cell phones. The program will begin shortly. Now this works great whether you have your voiceovers coming in on a dedicated QLab VO channel or on your cues channel where you also have your play-ons coming in. Either way, it's a different channel than your walk-in music fader. So now let's look at the example of playing a voiceover on top of a play-on. We would start the play-on, wait a couple seconds, play the VO. We need to dip the music to have the VO be intelligible, and then bring the music back up at the end of the VO. A couple different ways to do that, so let's check it out. Let's grab our VO that's introing our main presenter, Shane Smith. And first we can listen to it just in the clear, playing the play-on afterwards. So I can use the C key to toggle between auto continue and auto follow, or no auto continue or follow. You can also click right here and choose it with this drop-down menu, and you can also choose it down here in the inspector. So auto follow is what you want if you want to have the play on play after the VO. Let's listen to that. Please welcome Vice President of Sales, Shane Smith. Great. So now let's layer them. I'm going to remove the auto follow and change it to an auto continue on the music, and we'll play the music first. So I'll drag that up. And let's add a pre-wait of 2 seconds to the VO, and let's hear how that sounds. Please welcome Vice President of Sales, Shane Smith. The timing was fine, but the VO was buried. So how do we get around that? One way is to use our fingers and actually mix on the faders. And before I do that, I'm going to just add a couple spaces to the beginning of this VO. I like to do that whenever a cue is going to be automatically played by QLab due to an auto follow or an auto continue. And that way I visually know as soon as I press go on this cue, it's going to play the next one as well. So let's try this again. Please welcome Vice President of Sales, Shane Smith. Okay, that worked. I just needed to know the right time to pull the fader down. Another way to do it is to let QLab do the ducking for us. So under the VO, I'll go to Triggers, and I'm going to check the box for duck audio of other cues in this list while running. And I'm going to do it by a pretty healthy amount, 12 dB. Notice that you can type in a positive number, and QLab will add the negative for you because it assumes you always want to attenuate rather than amplify. And we'll do a little bit faster than the default, a half a second fade. So now let's listen to it without having to move faders and see how it does. Please welcome Vice President of Sales, Shane Smith. Okay, better, we're getting there. One issue I have is we're kind of losing the first word or two, so I'm going to back off our edit we made here, and this will add a little bit of silence that QLab will duck the other cue during that tiny bit of silence and give a little bit more space to the first word. And also the level here can come up to 0. Now, I should have done that on all of my VOs because they are not super loudly mastered pop recordings. They are recordings we just made real quick and normalized, but we didn't put through any kind of compression. So by bringing these cues up to 0 and leaving the pop music cues at -6, they will be a little bit better balanced. So let's listen to that one more time. Please welcome Vice President of Sales, Shane Smith. Great. And I can fade that out as needed or keep it going for as long as needed. I've got 2 minutes of track remaining here. Another way to handle the ducking is to do it in the console, and this requires that you bring in the VOs on a separate channel as we've done. You can set up a sidechain compressor so that when there's signal coming in on the VO channel, it ducks or compresses the cues channel, and then you can dial that into taste. I would recommend a post fader, a sidechain from the VO channel so that it only actually ducks the cues channel if you have that fader up and people are hearing the VO. I like the QLab approach because you can pick a level of attenuation and it sticks with it the whole time, whereas a compressor, depending on your attack and release times, might kind of start to pump and breathe during the middle of the VO. Another situation that is even more complex is when we want to play off a presenter with their particular play-on music, put the VO on top of that music, and then transition to a new play-on for the next presenter. So here's how we would do that. We can start with our example where let's say that this play-off is for the previous presenter play-off. And let's say we don't know how long it's going to take them to get off the stage, so we're going to remove the auto follow and auto continue, and I'll remove my 3 spaces from the beginning of this VO. And then let's say this PO is actually for Shane Smith, and I'm going to give it an indent because we're going to turn on auto follow for that. So we've got the previous playoff, we've got the new VO and the new play on. The new VO will auto follow to its play on. Let's listen to just that part and make sure that sounds good. Please welcome Vice President of Sales, Shane Smith. Couple issues there. One is we have to take off our pre-wait that we had previously so that it starts immediately when we play it. Please welcome Vice President of Sales. And we can even tighten up the editing of the file there. Otherwise, that's looking good. The next thing we're going to do is we're going to go to the Triggers tab of the VO, and we're going to tell it to fade and stop peers over, let's try 6 seconds. So as soon as this starts playing, it will fade out the previous play on, and when this finishes playing, it will play the next play on. Let's take a listen to how this sounds. And remember, we didn't link or auto-continue the previous play on with this VO because we don't know how long it's going to take the previous presenter to get off stage. And there might be a chair move on stage or something else that is dynamic. So we're just going to play this. We'll wait for the show caller to give us the all clear, or we'll visually know. Then we'll play the VO, and it will auto-continue the play on. This is the previous presenter wrapping up, walking off stage, applause. We're waiting, we're waiting. Okay, now it's time for the next VO. Please welcome Vice President of Sales, Shane Smith. Let's give ourselves a little more breathing room at the beginning of the VO. And let's give a little pre-wait before this play on. And let's check that out. Please welcome Vice President of Sales, Shane Smith. Great, that seemed to flow pretty nicely. And the great thing about how we've constructed this is it requires the least amount of manual moves on our part as the A1. All we need to do is go on the walk-off music when the previous presenter is done. We can have both of these faders up. When it's time to do the next VO, we don't have to move anything in terms of levels. We don't have to stop the previous play on because that's going to happen automatically with our trigger to fade and stop peers. And at the end of the VO, we also don't have to start the next PO or play on because it's going to auto-follow from this one. So a little bit of extra programming on the front end makes it all that much smoother during the show and, more importantly, less prone to human error. Now let's talk about something that happens at the end of each session, which is the last presenter raps. Maybe there's a video or a playoff or something, but often we just go straight to walkout music. Now, one solution to this is to find a walkout song that you like and put it into QLab, queue it up where you want it to start, and that way you'll be guaranteed instant playback the second you hit go. But another option is to use one of our scripts, in this case, the play pause for iTunes or music, and I'm just going to copy and paste that into the part of the show where I know there's a break. And one way that I like to delineate breaks in QLab or the end of the show is to add a memo cue. And I'm going to name this morning break with some dashes to separate it. And I also like to put one at the end of the show and just call it end of show. And the reason for this is that if a producer cuts a cue from the show, they say, you know what, we're never going to need to use the 10-minute announcement because the doors aren't opening until 10 minutes before the beginning of the show. I'll just cut it and add it to the end of the show. And that way it's very convenient there. If they say, you know what, we need that after all, I can just drag it back to where it goes. So we've got our little script here. Let's first pick out a walkout song that has a good beginning to it. Okay, this one's fine. It's got a gentle beginning, but we'll take it. So I queued it up at the beginning. And now at the end of the presenter's presentation, I have this fader up. I can hit go on QLab, and it will go ahead and play iTunes for us. The nice thing about this method is we didn't have to import the walk-in or walk-out music into QLab, nor did we have to use a different user-defined button or Stream Deck button to control music, nor did we have to keep track in QLab of what song we're playing. It just plays wherever we left off in the playlist. Let's look at another programming example, this time for a quiz show or game show that might happen during a corporate event. Let's say we have some music that needs to be played while a question is being asked and the contestants are thinking about the answer. And then we either need to play a winning sound effect or a losing sound effect, depending on which answer they choose. And we don't know which answer they're going to choose ahead of time, so we need both options available. And then we're going to do this over and over. So I have 3 sound effects already loaded into our play-ons playlist. A question sound effect, which we can change to an infinite loop, and let's just make sure that sounds good, looping. There's a little bit of a gap there, so I think we can tighten this up ever so slightly. Let's see how that sounds. Perfect. That's our question, and then we're going to have a win sound effect. It's got a little bit more of a tail than we need, so let's turn on integrated fade, and we're going to remove some of the tail here just with our out point. Let's go ahead and turn on lock fade to start end, which controls where our keyframes are going to be to edit this fade. Just by clicking, we can make some keyframes that are just like automation points in any digital audio workstation. So let's change this to a custom curve and take a listen. Back this up a little bit. That'll work. And let's listen to this one. Great. Let's put a couple colors on these. Red for lose, green for win, and let's do purple for the question. I'm going to copy all of these to our show cue list, and I know right after the morning break is where we're doing this section. However, I'm going to move win and lose out of the main cue list into the end of the show beyond where we're going to use them, because we're going to trigger them only with user-defined keys on the console. And that's because we don't know which one we're going to need, and rather than trying to scroll around the cue list to find the correct one, we'll just hit either correct or incorrect. So for win, under MIDI trigger, let's put in the control change that we know this user-defined key happens to be. And same thing for lose. And let's test those out. Great, both of those buttons work. And let's set a couple things on the triggers tab here, which is if running a second trigger hard stops and restarts. That way, if we need to play it multiple times in a row, when we hit the button again, it will play it again. And let's set these to fade and stop peers over time. And that's because we're going to be playing our question background music, but as soon as we play either a win cue or a lose cue, we want to dump out of the question music, and then they'll reset for the next question, and then we'll play that one. We've been told they're going to do this 3 times, so I'm going to do 3 question music cues here in order. And for these, I think I'm going to change the time to fade and stop over 3 seconds to make it a little more of a gradual fade out of the question music as we play the win or lose sound effect. We'll be using the go button to play the question underscore, and then we'll wait to see if we need to play the win or the lose depending on what the contestant on stage says. And whenever we press the win or the lose, that will go ahead and automatically take out the question music because we set the trigger to fade peers in the cue list. So let's try question number 1. We've got the underscore going. The next item in the cue list is the second question, not the right or wrong, because we don't know if it's going to be right or wrong, and we'll use our user-defined keys to trigger those as needed. So let's say that the contestant got the answer right, and we're going to press the win or correct sound, and that will take out the question music. Perfect. And now they say, let's go to our next question. So we'll go, and we'll wait. Let's say they got this one wrong. We'll press the incorrect sound. Ready for the next one. Let's press go for the next question. And let's say they got this one right. And if you wanted to have a different question underscore for each question, that's even better because we can put them in the cue list in the right order. So you have some kind of ascending tension or grandiosity of the music. And then you keep using the same win and lose every time, which takes out the preceding underscore. There's a few resources online that are incredibly useful for learning more about QLab, which I'd like to share with you. The first is Figure 53's YouTube channel. They have a bunch of short videos that explain features of QLab. Most of these are 10 minutes or less. But also under their live tab on YouTube, you'll find the Q class, which they've done a couple times now. It's a 3-day-long in-person class at their headquarters in Baltimore, but they've made it available for free on YouTube, and it really takes you from knowing nothing about QLab all the way through every single feature in QLab across audio, video, and lighting, although you can just check out the parts you want. But I highly recommend that as a way to learn all about QLab. The second is the QLab Cookbook, which is a collection of projects, examples, and experiments in all kinds of QLab topics. And a lot of what's in here are workarounds, tips, tricks, and hacks to make QLab do things that it doesn't do out of the box, including some really useful things in corporate events like level playing field. Level playing field is a technique developed by Mick Poole to even out the audio levels of different cues in QLab, and it uses an external command line tool called R128X CLI. But in this tutorial, Mick explains how to install this other command line tool and how to run it via an Apple script that he wrote that lives inside of QLab. And once you have this all set up, the beauty of it is you can select some cues, press a single keyboard shortcut, and it will balance the loudness of all of your cues. So this can be a huge time saver if you have to ingest a bunch of audio files that have different perceived loudnesses and you want to get them all in the same ballpark really quickly. Another interesting resource is the QLab Google group. This is an online forum where users of QLab ask questions, and that ranges from novices to advanced users. And then the people that reply to these questions are often very knowledgeable. It includes the staff from Figure 53, and also some power users, some Broadway level users of QLab that often come up with interesting solutions to people's questions and problems. In one example, someone asked if there's a way to trim audio files to where the audio begins, meaning if there's some silence at the beginning of an audio file, can QLab automatically trim the start point or the end point to where the audio starts? And Mick Poole here came up with a very clever solution, which was iterated over the last couple years, and the current version of this Apple script works with QLab 5.3. And this script can also be attached to a shortcut or a hotkey. And so if you receive a bunch of voiceover files that have a few seconds of silence at the beginning of them, you could select them all, hit your hotkey, and the script will run and trim them all to the beginning of each voiceover. So I definitely recommend checking out both the QLab Cookbook and the Google group. I find it quite inspiring to see all the solutions that people have come up with. And it's a good example of how QLab can be quite a simple application for playing back audio, but there's some advanced programming tools available, and you can use those to either build more complicated shows or just to create tools that make your life easier when you're building a show. And hopefully you'll find some other gems as you browse through. One question is whether you can use the free version of QLab for corporate events or if you need to pay for an audio license. And the answer is you definitely can do corporate events with the free license, but the paid license gives you a few features that may be helpful or advantageous. You're limited to 2 channels of audio output on the free license, which is 1 stereo output. That's fine if you're going to run all of your play-ons, pre-recorded VOs, any other sounds down 1 stereo output, which would be your cues output in your mixer, and then you can still play your walk-in music via a separate input since that's coming from another app like Spotify. So that's one way to make do with only 2 channels of output. You're also limited to no audio effects on cues, cue outputs, or device outputs. It can be useful to have effects on cues or cue outputs to either put an effect on an individual cue or to, for example, EQ all of your pre-recorded voiceovers through a VO bus in QLab. So that would be something to upgrade for. Also, being able to edit the audio output patch routing is useful in a corporate environment when you want to swap outputs 1, 2, and 3 and 4. So you can send your QLab outputs out of your device outputs 3 and 4 and send Spotify out 1 and 2. And that can be done in QLab using the audio output patch routing function. There's also some not specific audio related functions that are only available on a paid license that are useful in our line of work. And that includes network queues, MIDI queues, timecode triggers. Those are all things that could be useful to control QLab or have QLab control other things, as well as devamp queues and target queues, arm and disarm queues for doing some more advanced show control programming. And also script queues are only featured on paid licenses. And those are some of the things that can make our day-to-day life a little bit easier by having scripts to automate things like routing queues, playing and pausing Spotify, and making quick volume level adjustments with shortcuts. Another reason that I would recommend paying for QLab is that it's pretty inexpensive to rent licenses, and they have a rent-to-own model where every time you pay for a rental license, that counts towards the full purchase price. So their audio license is $500, but if you rent one day at a time, it's $5. And eventually that will all go towards your fully owned license.